I am Midori Higa. I'm the OneHome Program Manager at MDHI. And Rosie, you want to go next?
Hi there, I'm Rosie McQuiggan, and I am a OneHome coordinator. I support Jefferson County, and I also do family prioritization and referrals.
Megan.
Hi, my name is Megan Morales. I am a OneHome coordinator as well. I support our youth providers as well as the individual prioritization and referral. So that just means like single adult or couple households. And yeah. And I support Broomfield and in the future Tri-Cities and Arapahoe County, but not yet, those two.
Hi, I'm Josh Ledesma. I'm also OneHome coordinator, focusing on the access and assessment portion of coordinated entry in OneHome. And I also support the family system and as well as Boulder. Not fully, but eventually.
And my name is Renee Cruz, and I work for the Department of Housing Stability at the City and County of Denver. A large chunk of my work is supporting OneHome on the system side, where I'm the system administrator, working with the HMIS team.
Great. Thank you all. So just some housekeeping stuff. We do have a question and answer box because this is a webinar style Zoom instead of just the regular presentation meeting style Zoom. And that means that if you submit your questions, we can answer them and everyone should be able to see those answers as well. There's also a chat. I think that if you keep the questions in the question and answer, we'll be able to make sure they get answered. If they are in the chat, they might get a little bit lost in all of the stream of consciousness that you all happen to share with us throughout. You can still raise your hand if there's a question, those types of things, and we'll should have time on the back end to answer other questions if that's necessary. I don't know if I'm missing anything. You're smiling suspiciously. So I will start. So again, this is just an overview of OneHome. This is not a training that gets you to do a BI stat, because I know that's what people are sometimes looking for. We will talk about how that happens, but really just to talk about how OneHome is integrated in with MDHI and what that means and looks like. So folks have a better understanding of what we do. And I think that need has been great. And I'm really excited that we get to do this. So I will just dive in and then I'll take turns presenting. So we all work for Metro Denver Homeless Initiative, and Metro Denver Homeless Initiative is the continuum of care for the 7-county metro area. And it's a multi-agency collaboration that coordinates services and housing for folks that are experiencing homelessness. And the COC does a lot of different things, and it was hard to decide which things we should highlight here. So just going to highlight a few different things that the COC does. So one is the point in time count. So the PIT, we do the PIT at the end of January. Typically this year we did it at the end of February because of COVID. But it's a snapshot of folks experiencing homelessness, and that's literal homelessness, either staying in shelter or in a place not meant for human habitation on one night in the winter. And that's just to kind of get an idea of how many folks are experiencing homelessness. It's not comprehensive, and it is a really big community-wide effort for us to really dig in and work with a lot of different partners and volunteers to really capture those folks that are experiencing homelessness in our area. Also within the COC at MDHI is the annual NOFA. So that's a notice of funding availability. So people use NOFA in lots of different places, but it is something that we do internally to help allocate funds directly from HUD to community partners. It's about $30 million that we distribute annually that goes directly to housing and services for folks experiencing homelessness. It's a stakeholder-led effort, so we do have a NOFA committee that's seated by a bunch of folks that are from the community that help to determine and score the applications for funding. And some other COC activities, a mishmash of sorts. So other things that we do are improve coordination and communication in the region, and we engage a large number of stakeholders, including folks with lived experience through council and committee structure. So we do a lot of our organizational activities through those committees and councils. The COC is responsible for planning and implementing a regional approach in response to homelessness, establishing service standards, and we monitor a number of COC funded projects. Anything that we finance, we monitor or fund rather. And that's just to make sure that, you know, everything is going the way that it should go. And it's not to be punitive on folks, but really to make sure that we're able to partner with folks in success for folks that are experiencing homelessness. So with that COC, there's like a number of other things that happen here at MDHI. So just kind of going through those. HMIS is a big deal. So HMIS is our homeless management information system. It's Clarity by BitFocus. It's a statewide database that we're able to gather and use information from folks that are engaging with the services that are in HMIS. So there's a couple of things about it being a statewide instance that are great. So up here in the metro area, if we're going to search for somebody in HMIS, we can see if, oh, they're staying in Pikes Peak now, like they're staying at a shelter down there, or they're staying somewhere else. So you can kind of see that movement for folks. And it also helps us know that folks are moving and getting resources in other spaces. So HMIS allows us to keep track of clients, manage and track programs and program engagement. And that's how we manage coordinated entry or OneHome. And there's a lot of report opportunities. So you can pull reports out of there. There's a bunch of canned reports that anyone can access as an end user. And if there needs to be more support in tailored reporting, that's something our HMIS team can support as well. The whole goal of having this system and having an HMIS is to really decrease the trauma to our clients and increase communication between providers. So the idea is that if I have access to HMIS and you have access to HMIS, then I can communicate with you and say, hey, you know, I noticed you were working with Joe. I've been working with Joe too. We just started some work on his ID. Do you happen to know anything about X, Y, or Z or documents or whatever? That ROI that the client signs or a household signs for HMIS is good for all the folks that are engaged in HMIS. So there's not a need to kind of go back and forth to get additional ROIs or things like that. That client has given permission for us to have that communication by being in HMIS. So HMIS does a lot of training. That's what folks are always interested in. How do we get into HMIS? How do we do stuff in HMIS? How do we complete assessments for OneHome? So currently we're implementing a learning management system, and that's pretty fully launched for our basic HMIS training last week, sorry. And the training is specific to how you at your agency uses HMIS. And the goal is to kind of create pathways for different types of users. So some folks just use it for their own programs. Some folks use it for their own programs and OneHome. Some folks might use it for just to like do paper assessments, and then that gets back to a data person who enters all of that stuff for their agency. There's different ways that that training can be done. And so our goal is to really offer end users training that meets their needs. In the LMS, the learning management system will incorporate self-led work and instructor-led work. So that's very much that students or folks that are using the learning management system will do it at their own pace, and then we'll work with an instructor to learn more. So what about the data that goes into HMIS? That is often like, well, why are we putting all this stuff in here? What does it matter anyways? So the higher quality of the data, the higher quality of the results we get from it. And we at MDHI and many other of our stakeholders use the data that's in HMIS to analyze, evaluate, and monitor our region, our programs, and the state just to see how we're doing. And so it's really helpful to have as much information in there as possible so that we can see what the outcomes are for folks that are experiencing homelessness, how long people are experiencing homelessness for, what types of interventions folks are really using or not using. And we can see trends in there, evaluate data related to things like race and ethnicity. We can evaluate things related to age or see how age or things change over time by looking at those trends. And so we are working on dashboards for public consumption. Currently, we do have dashboards on our MDHI website for point in time for last year, and we'll update those dashboards to reflect this year's point in time once all the numbers are finalized. We also have an HMIS help desk. They are wonderful people that answer a lot of different questions. So it's not unusual for us to work back and forth with the help desk as well. But the help desk has a lot of different things. So there's a knowledge base of articles. You can submit tickets directly on the website versus email. And there's a lot of how-to guides. So user guides and user guides. How do you enroll a person into HMIS? How do you update an assessment for someone in HMIS? All of that information is on the Zendesk website. Okay, and so also under MDHI, we have some housing solutions opportunities for folks. So they provide grant opportunities and various types of assistance to people experiencing homelessness, or homeless service providers to support folks experiencing homelessness. So those two things are the Flex Fund and ESG. So for anyone that is a COC partner, so your agency has officially signed up to be a COC member and a partner with us, is able to access the Flex Fund. It's not like a cost to be a COC member or anything like that. It's just saying like, we commit to the work that you do as well. And so this provides one-time financial assistance to households that are experiencing housing crisis. It could be at risk of homelessness or literal homelessness. And the COC partner, so the service agency, would apply for the Flex Fund on behalf of the client. So all of the processes are laid out on our website, and those are pretty quick and easy, so filling out a form. And ESG is our Emergency Solutions Grant. So Emergency Solutions Grant is HUD funded. And so we receive our ESG allocation from the state. And so we're a pass-through for that. And then we have subrecipients that receive that funding for either rapid rehousing or homelessness prevention. And we help manage that. So we're doing the monitoring for those things and making sure that folks are using coordinated entry to access those resources. Okay. So we're going to dig into the meat of stuff. So also under MDHI is OneHome. So OneHome is the coordinated entry system, but it is not. Is a different part of MDHI. So just clarifying that piece, and we will go into that. I'll start this slide and then push over. So OneHome is a HUD mandated process, right? So HUD is saying coordinated entry needs to exist in your community. And the goal is that we're creating access and opportunities for folks that are experiencing homelessness and trying to make sure that we're matching the right folks to the right resources that are available through our system based on their strengths and needs.
All right. So OneHome right now serves the 7-county Metro Denver area. So it's Arapahoe, Adams, Boulder, Broomfield, Denver, Douglas, and Jefferson counties. And so yes, we are the coordinated entry system for the Metro Denver continuum of care. However, OneHome doesn't directly interact with clients, but we provide the coordination and facilitation of resource matching using data from HMIS. And we use this to guide equitable decision making to be able to make sure that we're matching those resources in a fair way. So one thing I really want to emphasize is that our community partners are OneHome. And what we mean by this is, yes, we are able to be there and provide the structure for this HUD mandated system, but with access and assessment, what's responsible for our inflow of households into OneHome That all comes from all of our community partners, all of you who are meeting clients who are coming in, who want to seek services, and folks who are actually doing the assessment. So you all are responsible for inputting our inflow to give us that data that we then use to make these matches. The prioritization piece is what we do, and same with the referral. But once again, that outflow into those house situations, once again, we are then directing them to you guys, our community partners, to then work with these folks. So when we say our community partners are OneHome, you are OneHome just as much as we are. So here's a little image about what things look like without coordinated entry, right? So maybe someone is seeking some shelter. It's not streamlined. There isn't necessarily a coordination or a streamlined way to ensure all of the resources that are available go to the folks who need it at that time, right? So some folks might hear about an opportunity from an outreach service provider. Maybe they get into a shelter wait list, and maybe that's it. Maybe some folks do get into that rapid rehousing flexible subsidy, but it's not necessarily triaged or reaching everybody in the same way or with the same amount of access or opportunity. And so with coordinated entry, ideally every single person or household at this level will be able to be referred to a centralized access point. And then while we'll get into a little more of the meat of this, the idea is that from that access point, their level of need will be able to be determined, and they'll be able to be referred to that level of service accordingly, no matter what that means to provide like a viable housing intervention or solution to whatever their housing crisis is at this moment. So when engaging in OneHome, these are some things, some key points around engaging with OneHome. The household must be literally homeless or at risk of homelessness. There must be agency commitment to explore all available housing options for a household. So OneHome is not a catch-all. It is not the only way to get housing. It is one of the many, many options to be able to get housing. So even though someone is enrolled in OneHome, continuing to explore that housing navigation piece is super crucial for a household. The household must remain in contact with the assessing agency and willing to update that contact information as needed. That agency must be willing to follow up with said household at regular intervals. It says less than 60 days. Ideally, it would be awesome if that kind of follow-up happened once a month. But this is just to ensure folks don't go inactive and that work is still continued, whether it be through doc readiness or just ensuring that folks are on track to facilitating, seeking out those housing solutions and things. Also, a component of OneHome enrollment and completion of assessment for OneHome and HMIS. The one exception for this is for DV and IPV providers. For federal requirements, they cannot be entered into HMIS. So here's our bathtub. It's a really awesome picture. So ideally, the bathtub gets filled from our inflow. So that's new and returning households. Returning households could mean people coming in from an inactive state, or folks who maybe were referred into a housing solution that maybe wasn't sustainable or didn't work out. And so they're coming back into OneHome and active on the community queue. Those active on the community queue is our bathtub water, and the outflow are the exits to housing and folks who are rendered inactive. The idea is that coordinated entry, when working efficiently and well, keeps all of those active on the community queue at this level. And when it doesn't, this bathtub will overflow. So one example of that, which we'll also get into, is let's say we just do a VI SPDAT for literally everyone we come into contact with. This bathtub will overflow significantly. We'll have folks waiting, and the amount of outflow we have won't necessarily do its part in terms of mitigating those active on the community queue. And so the 4 elements of coordinated entry that we focus on are access, assessment, prioritization, and referral. So access assures households experiencing that housing crisis that they can access support. So we're going to start with a very big pool of folks. And as we go down through the 4 elements of coordinated entry, those pools hopefully and ideally get a bit smaller. So at the point of access, people will come in and articulate what they are trying to receive, what kind of support they need. And from there, people will be able to conduct a problem-solving conversation to see if further assessment is needed. So at the assessment portion, we use standardized tools to document needs, strengths, vulnerabilities, and preferences around housing supports, et cetera. So the assessment, like the VI SPDAT, that'll go ahead and give us all of the data that we need, housing histories, any criminal justice involvement, any other kind of health factors or risk factors that go into this person's history of homelessness or wherever they're at. It gives us a better picture about their situation. So prioritization uses this data from the assessment piece to equitably allocate those resources. And so once they're matched accordingly, they'll be referred to whatever available resources are a best fit for that household. So we're going to talk a little bit about the access piece of coordinated entry. So as of right now, on the provider side, Metro Denver has decentralized access points. So what this means is that our service providers around the region are the folks that serve as access points. And ideally, access points will engage clients and households to determine how best to resolve their housing crisis. Once again, that may or may not include OneHome. So some of those approaches include safety planning, rapid resolution and problem solving, and diversion. Like we mentioned before, OneHome is not the catch-all or the one-size-fits-all for everyone experiencing homelessness or a housing crisis. And sometimes a lot of diversion or rapid resolution and those kinds of tactics will be able to solve an immediate housing crisis as opposed to a VI for PSH or rapid rehousing, which may take a very long time. On the client side of things, households experiencing housing crises will work with a provider, and through the ongoing relationship building of that provider, it will determine whether or not enrollment into OneHome is appropriate, right? So it's not just a one-time visit, check off the box, you're good. The idea is to determine exactly what this household needs. To go ahead and best suit their needs. And so with this, I want to talk a little bit about phased assessment. So this is an approach that minimizes trauma and continuously determines the most applicable interventions for folks. So like we said, we start with that big pull at access and work all the way down to refer folks into housing. If we do phased assessment properly and use the progressive engagement to collect all the information and focus on strengths and provide support where need be, we triage and safety screen folks, see if diversion or rapid resolution is effective. If not, then we can administer a coordinated entry initial screener, which does exist and should be done before a VI SPDAT anyway. And then, if need be, we can administer the VI SPDAT. So if we work with phased assessment, the idea is that we are meeting people exactly where they're at, wherever their housing crisis is. And through phased assessment, when done properly, we'll be able to provide the appropriate level of intervention to each household, wherever they might be.
Great, thank you, Dash. So after engaging with the client and using phased assessment, ideally, if you determine that they are appropriate for a housing resource through OneHome, you will then complete an assessment. Per HUD, continuums of care must use a standardized assessment to determine client need. As a lot of you know, in our community right now, we're using the VI SPDAT. However, there is a chance that that will change in the future. In addition to the VI SPDAT, clients are also asked about living preferences. And these are really important pieces for providers to fill out to make sure that an appropriate match is made and that we're really addressing the needs of the client. All assessors must complete the training that Midori mentioned earlier through HMIS. So if you have questions about that, you can reach out at the end. All of the assessments must be completed in the HMIS system unless you are a domestic violence provider, as Josh mentioned. There is a different route taken for that, and we do a separate training for domestic violence providers to address this process. Once the VI SPDAT is completed and entered, the housing provider should continue to explore other housing options because, as Josh said, OneHome is not guaranteed housing and it does not always work quickly. The provider will then refer the household to the community queue, which signals to the OneHome coordinators that this household is ready to be prioritized for housing. All assessments completed prior to October 1st, 2019 should be be redone, as should any for which the household has undergone a significant change. So that could be family makeup, income, something like that, that would drastically change their needs. Otherwise, this assessment should not be completed more than once annually. On the client side of things, a household will be deemed appropriate to be assessed if they're literally homeless, and I will go over that definition in the later slides. When assessing clients, it's important to be very transparent about the process and let them know that this is not a guarantee for housing. So just because you complete the assessment, it doesn't mean that you're going to be matched with housing, and that we cannot provide any sort of timeline for when they could expect housing. This can help manage their expectations and also make them more aware of how the process really works. Client input about their housing, as I said, is very important, and is used if a household is prioritized to determine the location, and also the types of programs that they might be interested in. Once an assessment is completed, it's important for the household to start gathering their necessary vital documents like IDs, birth certificates, social security cards, verification of homelessness, proof of income, etc. So the household is prepared if and when they're matched to a housing resource. Additionally, these items can be scanned and uploaded directly into HMIS for safe storage and easy access if and when the time comes up for them to be matched. So case conferencing is another big piece of coordinated entry. We are currently in the process of making a lot of changes to case conferencing, so it looks a little different than it has in the past and will continue to look different in the future. At this time, if providers have any clients or any households that they want to discuss, they should submit these names to OneHome coordinators so that we can discuss them at case conferencing. Case conferencing should not be an update meeting or a matching meeting, and should instead be focused on problem solving and addressing any barriers that a household might have to housing. Action steps should be decided upon in case conferencing for the provider to work on with the household. And at the next case conferencing, the provider can share how those actions worked and where the household is now in the process. During these meetings, data around inflow, active clients, outflow, and length of time homelessness should also be looked at. And that really helps us understand how the system is working or where we might have any blockages or bottlenecks. It also can help set timelines and goals for move-in dates with clients. And although the client is not part of case conferencing, the conversations that they have with their case manager before case conferencing is very important, as it will help to guide the problem solving that occurs in case conferencing. In these conversations, the households can help to identify their needs and preferences, as well as any potential barriers and strengths that they have.
Hey, Rosie, can I jump in really quick?
Yeah.
Just in relation to Lonnie's question and the coordinated entry screener, the coordinated entry screener is just part of a process that someone who has access to HMIS does. So other communities might have like a number you call in to set up a coordinated entry intake, and we don't currently have something like that set up. So we do rely on our partners to really engage folks experiencing homelessness or having a housing crisis to bridge them to OneHome. So anyone can then, go in and say like, oh, okay, you might be experiencing homelessness. Let's go through this pre-screener, which anyone has access to on HMIS, and say, okay, yeah, it looks like maybe we should move forward with a VI SPDAT, and then making sure that they're connected with a person who can assess them if that's not you. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Thank you. All right, moving on to prioritization, which is the next element of coordinated entry. And this is when households are identified as potential matches for housing resources. And so Josh said the intention is to be equitable in our distribution of resources and to really be data-driven. So we use the assessment, the VI SPDAT, and using that, we're able to identify the most vulnerable individuals who are on our community queue who might be appropriate for a given housing resource. These guidelines that we use are not static and can be modified to meet the specific community needs, or if something like COVID hits, in which individuals with chronic health issues or who may be living in an institutional setting or incarcerated are increasingly vulnerable. The prioritization guidelines are approved by our community partners, usually through community design team or the regional governing council. OneHome uses the available data entered into HMIS and OneHome by providers to prioritize households based on these approved characteristics. Despite our best efforts, there are gaps in the system with prioritization, which means not every household or individual will be prioritized, or it could take a very long time for them to be prioritized. And this is one reason why we do ask folks to continue looking for other resources, even once they've entered someone into the OneHome system. Throughout this process, providers are asked to provide updates on clients and maintain updated contact information in the system. So as Josh mentioned, every 60 days, ideally, you will be going into HMIS and updating the current living situation assessment. Most ideally, you will be in contact with your client every 30 days, but we do look for every 60 days that update, and that also keeps them active in the system and lets us know that they're still in need of a resource. On the client side of things, clients should stay in contact with the assessor and provide updates on any changes, like I mentioned, on housing status, family makeup, anything that will significantly change their situation or needs. And as mentioned, there's no way to determine how long it will take for the household to be matched. So the family should keep working, or the individual should keep working on obtaining vital documents and making sure that they have the absolute most recent contact information in the system. So then looking at the different guidelines for all of our populations, right now, each population uses a different guideline for prioritization. And as I mentioned, these are agreed upon by our community partners. So due to the pandemic, prioritization has really changed to reflect the needs of the community and prioritize households who may be especially susceptible to becoming seriously ill from the pandemic. So our community has decided to prioritize households who are above the age of 65 and have chronic health conditions, as we know that these individuals are more likely to become seriously ill from the virus. Individuals with criminal justice involvement have also been prioritized, as incarceration or institutionalization also increases the likelihood of contracting the virus due to the close living quarters and the difficulty with maintaining sanitary conditions. So individual prioritization is currently broken down into 5 different tiers with these factors in mind. The first tier is individuals over the age of 65 with a chronic health condition and criminal justice involvement. This tier is then sorted by length of time homeless. The next tier is all individuals over the age of 65, with individuals with a chronic health condition and longer lengths of time homeless prioritized first. The third tier is individuals between the ages of 55 and 64 with a chronic health condition and criminal justice involvement. The fourth is folks between 55 and 64 with a chronic health condition. And the last is folks in the same age range with just criminal justice involvement. And these last 3 tiers are sorted by length of time homeless. Additionally, for individuals, length of time homeless is used to determine what type of housing resource is appropriate for the individual. Prioritization for our youth is thankfully a bit more straightforward. They are just prioritized first by chronic health condition, then by criminal justice involvement, and finally by length of time homeless. And at this time, the appropriate housing intervention is being determined in case conferencing. Family prioritization is a bit of a mixed bag. It is currently half regular pre-COVID prioritization and half interim COVID prioritization. So for regular prioritization, scores from the VI SPDAT are still being used. Families that score between a 4 and an 8 are eligible for rapid rehousing, and those families are prioritized by age of youngest child and then age or length of time homeless. If a family scores above a 9 on the VI SPDAT and is chronically homeless, which I will define later, they fall in the range for permanent supportive housing. The other 50% and they are also sorted by age of youngest child and then length of time homeless. Then the other 50% is using our interim COVID prioritization. And with this prioritization, households with the highest number of vulnerability factors, and these factors are being over the age of 65, having a chronic health condition, being pregnant, or having involvement with the criminal justice system will be prioritized first. After that, they are sorted again by length of time homeless and age of youngest child. And with the COVID prioritization, no scores from the VI SPDAT are being used. So in order to identify and determine who should be prioritized, we use the data that is put into the system. So as Midori said, the better the data, the better match we make and the better results we have. We pull these prioritization lists on a regular basis in order to incorporate households who are added to the system. And so that's why we can't really give a timeline on when a household might be matched, as the queue is fluid and changes as folks are entering and leaving the system. Some things to keep in mind is that, like I said, household needs and preferences do matter. So make sure to complete that part of the assessment. We also want to make appropriate matches that will result in long-term placement. So the more info that you can provide, the better the match we can make. And lastly, certain programs do have eligibility requirements related to household history. So there could be a time when a household is prioritized, but might not meet the specific program requirements. And the last piece of coordinated entry is referral. And this is when a household is prioritized and identified for a specific housing resource. When an appropriate resource is identified for a household, a OneHome coordinator will then make the match in the HMIS system. The housing provider will be notified of this match, and it is then their task to outreach the household to confirm eligibility and begin the enrollment process. Housing providers are expected to attempt outreach of the client at least 3 times in a 2-week period to make contact. And that's really just another reason why it is so important for us to have that updated contact information, because if after 2 weeks and at least 3 attempts, there is no contact, then it is possible for there to be a denial to the program. Service providers who complete the assessment or are working with the household often provide support to the family once, or the household once matched. Housing providers also will help out with that at times. Once a household is referred, they should expect to be contacted by the housing provider regarding next steps. And referrals are time sensitive again, so having that good contact info is so important. Client choice is also very important, as I mentioned, and households do have the right to turn down any match that they do not feel is appropriate or meets their needs. If that does happen, they will be re-referred to the next appropriate resource. If the household is denied by the housing provider for any reason other than them finding a housing resource and no longer being literally homeless, they will also be reprioritized and matched the next available resource. So just some quick definitions, because when working with OneHome, it is pretty important to be familiar with some of these HUD definitions. So in order to be referred to the community queue, a household must be literally homeless. And that means that within the last 7 days, they must have stayed outside in a shelter, including a motel paid for with an agency voucher, or in a place not meant for human habitation, such as a car or an abandoned building. An individual is also considered literally homeless if they're exiting an institution where they were for less than 30 days, if they were literally homeless prior to their entry. One really important thing to note is that couch surfing is not literally homeless according to HUD, as that is something that comes up a lot. So staying with family and couch surfing does not count as being literally homeless. And then chronic homelessness is another important definition for us to know, because that is a requirement for permanent supportive housing. So in order to be considered chronically homeless, a household must have experienced homelessness consecutively for the last 12 months or have at least 4 instances of homelessness in the last 3 years to equal 12 months. Additionally, to be considered chronic, the household must have a documented and verifiable disabling condition.
All right, so I'm going to go over some resources through OneHome. It's probably not a surprise to anyone, but there are few resources available compared to the number of households experiencing homelessness in our community. This is why we use prioritization as a way to target who we offer those housing resources to. So there's three main categories. The first one is rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing is a short-term or medium-term subsidy that includes rental assistance or move-in assistance. What that often looks like is a security deposit assistance, application fees, rental subsidies, and other move-in costs. It's pretty flexible, so it really depends on the program. And also the rental assistance generally has a maximum allowable number of months, and there's no guarantee that a household would receive the maximum allowable as well. So depending on their income and whatever benefits they have and whatever else is going on in their life, the program will pay a portion of the rent and the household will pay a portion of the rent. And depending on the structure, that will be assessed monthly. And in addition to that actual financial support, there's also case management to help them stabilize in housing. And then there's additional services dependent on funding source. So some rapid rehousing programs have behavioral health support or a SOAR advocate. This really depends on the structure of their program and what funding they receive them. So the next one is permanent supportive housing, PSH. This is a long-term or indefinite subsidy. It means it's ongoing rental assistance for as long as they are enrolled and active in the program. And generally what that looks like is that the client pays 30% of their income towards rent, and then the housing voucher pays the remainder of their rental cost. And the rent itself is capped at a certain amount. So it's called the fair market rate, so FMR. So the actual rental cost can't go above that. So that impacts where they can live. And then there's also ongoing case management in connection to other services. The intensity of the support may depend on the funding source or property. So some of them have a lot of case management or additional services that are attached to the resource, and some are more like referred out to these resources that household needs. So the last main one is homelessness prevention, HP for short. Right now in our community, it's really COVID related. It does require an enrollment into HMIS and a completion of the OneHome approved targeting tool. And homelessness prevention is essentially targeting folks that are at imminent risk of homelessness. Because of the eviction moratorium, that looks a little different right now. So because people aren't necessarily at risk of homelessness for non-payment of rent. But what it can look, I'm not going to go through all the different examples, but an example is a household that is couch surfing and they're having to leave their this person's place within the next 14 days, or they're exiting jail imminently. So it's really trying to get at those folks that are in non-literal homeless destinations, but they're at risk of homelessness imminently. Okay, so you guys have heard us talk a lot, so we're gonna watch a video on Housing First.
Housing First has 5 key principles. If you're not following the 5 principles, it's not Housing First. Principle number 1, immediate access to housing with no housing readiness conditions. Participants meet with a support team once per week, but housing is not dependent on psychiatric treatment, abstinence, or other readiness conditions. And when we say no housing readiness conditions, we mean none. Now, many participants stay housed in their first rental, but evictions happen. With the support team's help, it's an opportunity for learning, adjusting, and the immediate chance to try again. Research shows Housing First reduces emergency room visits, hospitalization, shelter use, detox services, and incarceration. There are no common indicators that predict who Housing First will and won't work for. So given its effectiveness, let's focus on Housing First, then let participants tell us the next step. Principle number 2, consumer choice and self-determination. This principle highlights that participants want and can make productive change occur in their lives. But in order to thrive, meaningful housing options are a necessity, and research shows that a majority of participants prefer independent market housing throughout the city. Now, in order to foster learning and self-determination, it's important that the team support most choices participants make. Though the team can point out expectations, they should avoid overprotecting participants from learning opportunities. When choices have poor outcomes, a supported learning environment promotes more informed choices in the future, reducing long-term harm and increasing self-sustainability. Principle number 3, recovery orientation. People are more likely to do well and achieve personal goals when they have an opportunity to find their own recovery. Housing First relies on supporting people as they work at their pace towards self-defined goals. Whether it's treatment, returning to work, or reconnecting with family. The addition of peer workers on the support team addresses power dynamics, increases safety, and models hope for both participants and team members. Finally, by building, following, and reviewing strength-based recovery plans, the support team can spend less time managing crisis and more time on the steps that lead to the participants' goals for recovery. Principle number 4, individualized and person-driven supports. Now, support is meant to fit the participant, not the other way around. People are at the center of Housing First. Therefore, the support team provides appropriate team members, approach, and tools that help each individual with their goals. Whether that's grocery shopping, working, adopting a pet, finances, therapy, or engaging with new communities. By replacing complicated policies with flexible models and a can-do philosophy, the team helps participants reduce long-standing systemic barriers, thereby improving self-determination, choice, and quality of life. Principle number 5, social and community integration. Moving to a new area can be a hard experience for anyone and can make you feel pretty isolated and lonely. The Housing First team can help participants build community connections based on their specific needs and interests. The team also fosters community development by providing landlords and community members with education on Housing First, inclusion, and myth-busting negative stereotypes. And though supporting social and community integration may take time, it can go a long way in helping participants establish relationships and support networks within new communities.
All right. There we go. Okay. So Housing First is core to the work of coordinated entry in OneHome. So more on housing resources. We call this alphabet soup because there's a lot of different acronyms that people use in this work, and it can get really confusing if you don't know what they mean. So the first one is TB or TBV, so tenant-based or tenant-based voucher. It's also known as scattered site. With a tenant-based resource, the household locates a unit in the community. So this could be a rapid rehousing or a permanent supportive housing voucher. And then it is really good for households with challenging histories. So folks who may have some criminal background concerns, people with a lot of eviction history, or often just folks who want that independence to live in the greater community. Landlord engagement and support is really beneficial. The Housing First video touched on it, but that education to landlords and that advocacy for folks experiencing homelessness, as some landlords historically may not have worked with households that have experienced homelessness. So with a tenant-based voucher, the housing resource or the rapid rehousing resource is attached to the person themselves or the household themselves. This next one, project-based or project-based voucher. This is a site-based resource, meaning it is attached to a specific unit in a specific place. So if that household leaves that housing, they do not have access to that housing resource anymore. So yeah, PB or PBV. It generally includes on-site supports that looks different depending on the building or in the program makeup. It's frequently, though, it's case management on site, or maybe they'll have a mental health provider that comes to the building twice a week, or just general community building that is integrated into the, kind of the structure of the building and the community. So the next one is SRO, single room occupancy. These are generally project-based. There's, I think, one that I'm aware of that is a private landlord that operates an SRO, but most of the time it is a project-based permanent supportive housing resource or short-term resource voucher. So you would think of this as a hotel style. So there's no kitchen and there's no separate rooms. Often they'll have a mini fridge and a microwave, but that will be about it. Maybe some counter space. And they may or may not include their own individual bathroom. So some of them do have a private bathroom within their unit, but others have like a shared bathroom per floor. Some SROs also have a shared kitchen within the building as well, and a shared living space, but it really depends on the actual building and its makeup. So the next thing is funding sources. So there are a lot of different ways that housing gets funded in our community. The first one that a lot of people are most familiar with is COC, or Continuum of Care Rapid Rehousing, or PSH, Permanent Supportive Housing. These are required to go through OneHome. One thing I'll specify is that COC housing resources are HUD-funded housing that is specific to people who are experiencing homelessness. So you have to have that history of homelessness. This does not include like a housing choice voucher or HCV. It does not include any other kind of affordable housing that doesn't have that eligibility of having formerly or currently experienced homelessness. Okay, so ESG, Emergency Solutions Grant, HP or RRH. So that's Homelessness Prevention and Rapid Rehousing. ESG in general can fund a lot of different things, but what we're looking at in OneHome is that homelessness prevention or rapid rehousing that is also required to go through OneHome. The next one is HUD 811s. So these are federally funded. They pass through local housing authorities. They're not required to go through OneHome. Their eligibility is based on income. So those who are below 30% area median income, AMI, which is another acronym, and folks that are living with a disability. And then the housing authority that offers HUD 811s to OneHome does have a eligibility criteria of folks that are institutionalized or at risk of institutionalization as well. That's generally not a barrier though with our population. And then they do offer resources to us, but we're not always the only referral source for one unit. So it can be kind of, we have to work really fast to make sure we can secure that spot for our folks. All right, so the next one, state. So these are funded through the state legislature. They often come with a limited coordinated entry requirement. So what that looks like is like 50% through OneHome and 50% through another approved process, DOH approved process. A lot of the state housing resources are funded through marijuana tax dollars. Probably not all of them, but I'm not an expert enough to say. And then local and county city resources. These have like program dependent eligibility. So basically the agency that is operating the program will work directly with the county or city administrator to determine what is the eligibility and who they're trying to target for this housing resource. They do have some local, we do have some local resources that have a CE requirement. So that's mainly through HOST, which is the Department of Housing Stability at the City and County of Denver. And they have some rapid rehousing that goes through OneHome. Okay, so the OneHome program in HMIS. So coordinated entry, first of all. So we have an agency within HMIS that is the OneHome agency. And then within the OneHome agency, we have the OneHome program. The purpose of this program is to track who's experiencing homelessness in our region. The folks that are actively awaiting a OneHome resource are on the community queue. And the community queue is not a set list where we go down. It's kind of to what Rosie was saying before, we pull that dynamic, we have a dynamic prioritization. So the community queue is more of a pool of people that are waiting. It allows us a way to capture data. So we're gathering information on people's housing and homelessness history, disabling conditions, income, benefits, things like that. So we can understand the folks that are in our system and what their needs are. And the goal is to have a quality by name list. And in very short, a by name list is a list as all of the folks in our community that are currently experiencing homelessness. And a quality by name list includes those who are not yet in coordinated entry. So right now, ours is only really looking at folks that are in coordinated entry, but a quality by name list would look at all of them. And it really looks so that we understand who is coming into our system, to that bathtub analogy, and then who is leaving our system as well. So we have an understanding. And then we do have a veteran by name list as well, and it's de-identified all veterans experiencing homelessness in our region that are eligible for VA supports. So that includes GPD, which stands for Grant Per Diem, and that is a transitional housing resource. There's SSVF, which is Supportive Services for Veteran Families, which is rapid rehousing. And then HUD-VASH, which is a partnership between HUD and the VA to provide permanent supportive housing for eligible veterans. And there are a lot more resources for veterans than there are for the general population. And that's one of the reasons why we kind of pull them out and look at the veterans as a whole, since they have their specific eligibility and their specific programs. Okay, so how to best utilize HMIS. So there are lots of benefits of HMIS. One thing that's really important that folks often miss or forget to do is entering contact info. So going into the household's client profile and into the contact tab and putting their contact information or their case manager information or their email, whatever it is. It's really important because when a person is matched to a housing resource, the first place a housing provider is going to look is the contacts tab to see how they can reach that household. And if there's nothing there, then that's going to slow down the entire process because they can't get in touch with the client and they have to dig around for other places to reach them. So it's super important that there's contact information and up-to-date contact information. So if you are working with a client and you can't do anything else at all, just update the contact info and you're still helping them in this situation. So the next one is uploading docs. This includes our this refers to vital docs in particular, which are Colorado ID, Social Security card, and birth certificate. And HMIS is a very safe and secure place to store documents. It's a lot safer than a filing cabinet. It is always there, and it's secure. Only folks who have agreed to be in the system or have signed that they won't share the information are in HMIS. So yeah, very important because as we know, it can be pretty challenging to get some of these documents. There's a lot of bureaucracy often. And then folks lose their vital docs or it gets stolen or their property is somehow damaged. And then suddenly they have to start at square one and go all the way back and go through those, go get an appointment at DMV or whatever it is. And it's really frustrating. And one thing that helps too is having those documents in HMIS. So when a housing provider is working on that application packet with that household, they can go into HMIS and just pull those from the system. Most of our housing resources do require some housing, like a vital document in some way or form, not necessarily for the application, but maybe a landlord will need it in order to do their landlord application. So yeah, so this is really important. The next thing is understanding service connections of clients for coordination. So basically what this means is that you're using HMIS to help you do your work. So if you go in and you see that folks are enrolled in not in a housing program, but they're enrolled in a program, or they have services at a particular agency, you know where they're getting services, and then you can connect with those case managers and stuff to provide better service for folks, or maybe get in contact with someone you're having trouble locating, just essentially coordinating services because you can see where they're accessing them. Basically that. And then depending on the subpopulation, this can also provide a guide on who to reach out to when determining length of time homeless. So essentially, if there's an agency that uses HMIS a lot to track their services, and you can go in and see that, oh, hey, they've been using this services at this agency for the last year and a half, well, then you know that you can reach out to them to get a homelessness verification. Yeah, and it really varies based on the subpopulation because some of our communities use HMIS more than others, but it can help when determining that length of time homeless. Okay, so the future of OneHome. We've got a lot of things that we want to do. So the first one is overhauling assessment and prioritization. So basically this means that we're looking at our assessment, which right now includes, the OneHome enrollment and the VI SPDAT in particular, and really saying like, is this still beneficial to our community? And then if not, what can we do? And so to do that, we're going to create a formalized work group, and there will be an application for that work group coming out soon. So if people want to be involved in it. And one thing with overhauling assessment is prioritization, because we can only prioritize folks on the data that we have in the system. I think we kind of touched on that a few times, but so if there's something not in the system, we can't use it for prioritization. So when we're overhauling assessment, we're going to make sure we are including all those things that we want to potentially prioritize folks on as well. Next, we're going to continue with case conferencing improvements and engage case conferencing sub-regionally. So Resi talked about this a bit, but essentially we're just trying to use some tactics that have been done across the country that have proven to work even without, to reduce the amount of people experiencing homelessness, even without additional housing resources. And we want to utilize those case conferencing improvements and also increase our case conferencing sub-regionally as well, because right now it's only really present in our family, youth, Denver, and Boulder communities. So we want to make sure that we're covering our whole region. So next, increase monitoring and data quality. We talked about data quality a few times, but high quality data allows for better quality matching. And in order to know if we have high quality data, we have to monitor it. And so next is revamp OneHome trainings. So we're going to use of the learning management system, the LMS, which Midori touched on. And then we're also going to update the housing provider training. And then we're going to have a training specific for assessors at access points on for those who use HMIS, as well as those who complete the assessment on a paper copy. Yeah, so for both of those, but essentially just giving more training for that access and assessment piece. Next is updating OneHome policy and procedures. We haven't done that in a while, so it's very important that we get that done, and we'll be soliciting feedback at community design team and regional governance council. And the last one, and the very, very important one, is lived experience opportunities. So right now we have a young adult leadership committee that is going through a revamping of their recruitment and application process. So they've been in existence for a couple of years now, but they're kind of going through a revamp of what's going on of their work. And we're also going to have other lived experience engagement. What that will look like is first kind of building relationships with folks with lived experience, and then eventually having their own lived experience committee, but we really want to build those relationships first. Also, we want to incorporate lived experience into all of our work groups. Yeah. Okay, so what about Built for Zero? Built for Zero is a movement initiative from Community Solutions that champions evidence-based practices. Our state and region are engaging in this initiative to reach functional zero. And functional zero does not mean that there are 0 people experiencing homelessness. What it means is that homelessness is rare, brief, and a one-time occurrence. That if a person essentially enters the homelessness system, they can quickly be connected to a housing resource as they are interested in, in the resource as well. So there can also be folks who maybe aren't quite ready, but they are still, once they are, we can connect them. So OneHome does not equal Built for Zero, but we do use tactics to increase housing outcomes that Built for Zero uses. So those case conferencing improvements, as well as sub-regional homeless coordination teams. And that's a big piece because we know even within our metro, which is wide, we have 7 counties. Each county is a little different. So, and each city as well is a little different. So those sub-regional homeless coordination teams aims to really get at that. And then the last thing is we're tackling one subpopulation at a time. So we really want to, try things out and see how they work, and then test and then scale that up to other populations.
That is all of the content that we have for sharing. People are able to verbalize questions if you want to. So if you raise your hand, you can verbally ask questions if there's other questions that folks have about this material, or there's any slides that you want to go back to and look at. So Kathy is asking about housing providers being involved in case conferencing. Some of our case conferencing groups do include housing providers, but not always. In the iteration of case conferencing that we have right now, I don't know that it would be beneficial. Latanya is asking, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Please be patient with me if I'm not. What IPV is. So DV is domestic violence and IPV is intimate partner violence. So those partners that we have in the community have to follow the guidelines by VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, and so they're just not able to access HMIS. Okay. I'm going to try to answer these live, Renee, while you're
Hey, so Majority,
yeah.
Tamara's asking if you can bring up the youth prioritization document again.
Sure can. And I don't know where it's going to go yet. If it'll go on the OneHome website or if it'll go on the MDHI website. I know that's extra confusing. Anna's asking where we would post this.
Yeah, there were several questions about where the recorded
posting.
training will be found.
Okay. I'm able, so once we finish, I can pull everyone's names again, and then I can send an email to say like, here's where it's posted and all of those bits and pieces so that people can access it. And then I'll add in links for like the video. There's links within the PowerPoint presentation, just that stuff so that you'll have access to it. Just missed this question. Okay, 2 questions. First, I have 2 clients who have siblings that are also clients at our organization. When I completed the OneHome, if you guys forget, would I apply for each of them separately or they? So it depends on the family composition. So families must include a minor child. So you could do a family VI as long as there's a minor child in the household and the adult in the household has custody of that child. So if for some reason there's a minor in the household that's staying with their aunt and their aunt doesn't have custody, but really the child would live with the aunt, it just gets really complicated. But in general, it needs to be someone who has custody of a minor child that's in the household. And there might be other adults in the household, like grandma also is with them or whomever, but there needs to be a minor child. If it's multiple adults that are being served by your agency, they would each have to have their own individual adult VIs for that. Okay. I'm gonna go back to these other questions. I'll work from the bottom, Renee, if you're working from the top. Okay. Kathy's asking, I've noticed others have mentioned they have trouble accessing VI SPDATs in HMIS. So no, VI SPDATs are in the OneHome program. So if you do not have access to the OneHome program, then you cannot see a VI SPDAT. If you do have access to the OneHome program, you have to go in and change your toggle to OneHome to make sure you're in the OneHome program and open that program in order to see the VI SPDAT. If you want visual help doing that, like someone, you can share your screen and we can navigate that for you. Office hours is a great place to come. Kathy is giving me an opportunity to plug office hours verbally. We do office hours on the 1st and 3rd Tuesday mornings at 11 and the 2nd and 4th Thursday afternoons at 3. They're signaling. And the Teams link is on our MDHI calendar. So you just can pop in there and join the Teams meeting and come and chat with us. But yeah, if you are not in the OneHome program, you will not be able to see someone's assessment. You have to be inside the OneHome program. You would have to get on HMIS, Kathy, because you're a housing provider. You should have access to submit your vacancies. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't have access. So we would need to chat about that. So in our email of other questions that we will answer, we can chat about gaining access to OneHome and to the extent that that would be necessary. Still working for the bottom. Does someone help find a client an independent apartment after they get a voucher? Okay, so again, so we aren't in the business of giving out vouchers. We match people to resources that are available through coordinated entry. So someone may be awarded a tenant-based voucher through a OneHome resource. And with that, they would receive some navigation support from the agency that's providing the voucher, who would also be providing the case management. But oftentimes the folks that are assessing the person and the housing provider work together once someone's referred to a resource to help get that resource going. So it's not just one person doing the work. It's usually a combination. Be Connected is also a great resource that folks have been using for folks that have vouchers. So those are great opportunities for folks who are getting housing choice vouchers or Section 8 to help explore that. There is a cost associated with that for the client or household. Tori's asking, is there a specific amount of times a participant can be at case conferencing? Or I'm assuming you're asking if they can be brought up at case conferencing. And I would say, as long as they aren't hindering the process for other folks to be discussed at case conferencing, we can continue to discuss a household at case conferencing to work through what I've been calling speed bumps come up for their path to housing. Yep, I can show the slide for chronic homelessness. Slider do that. Chronic homelessness.
One thing I'll say about this one is we did not create this definition. It was the federal government.
Thanks for that. Yeah, so we are planning on posting this webinar online so folks can see it again. Okie doke. And I lost my menu button. Okay. I'll leave this up for another minute. And again, if folks want to raise their hands to verbally ask questions, you can, or you can type in another question, but we can stay on to answer those questions too. HIV is not considered a chronic, well, it's not considered a chronic health condition for the VI SPDAT. The chronic health condition says, do you have a chronic condition such as anything wrong with your liver, kidney, stomach, lungs, or heart? And there's a separate HIV question in the body of the VI SPDAT, but when we consider chronic health conditions, we look at the enrollment screen questions as well. And if a person chose to say that their positive status was in fact a chronic health condition for them, then that would be included in that way. We had a client who suffered a significant mental health issue and we were unable to complete the VI, and he wouldn't qualify for an M1. Yeah, so I have encountered many a client who will either not do the VI SPDAT and or is telling you things that you're like, that is not true. What you were telling me is not true. I know 100% certain that you do have a substance use issue, a mental health issue, and a physical health condition, but you are not telling me that you have any of those things at all. We do have a process in place, our alternate process, and available for folks who maybe aren't able to kind of complete that. And so there would need to be documentation, though, that there are things going on with said person to make sure that it's not just someone saying like, I'm going to answer all these questions for you, so that they could be in there. However, I would want to make sure that we do have some sort of ROI for that person in the system, so that we're not just like arbitrarily putting them in a system that they're not giving us permission to put them into, because that would feel really unfair. So not being able to do the VI SPDAT would be a little bit different than me than not being able to get the ROI. But the alternate process is on our website, and we have a committee that meets monthly to review those cases or situations to determine what would be appropriate.